I thought one of the justifications, the main justification for this wildly inflated Ukraine funding was that it was going to help reestablish America's industrial base.
And in fact, one of the most kind of oft-used arguments by a lot of the advocates for the war in Ukraine was that we would sort of degrade the Russian military for a song and restore our defense industrial base at the same time. Actually, more or less the reverse has happened. The Russian military is larger, and this is, General Kavoli, the SACEUR, has admitted this. The Russian military is larger. It's battle hardened. I mean, our military has not fought a peer adversary, well, I mean, really since World War II, but certainly since Vietnam and Korea. The Russians have gone toe-to-toe with the Ukrainians, who are capable, and they have a revved-up defense industry at the same time. So in a sense, we're worse. Meantime, the Europeans have basically been asleep at the switch, not going through with their defense buildup, with a few notable exceptions like Poland. So, and then you look at China, which is by far the most formidable challenger, 10 times the GDP of Russia. This administration, Tony Blinken has said, Xi Jinping has given the instructions to their military to be ready for a war over Taiwan by 2027. Frank Kendall, the Secretary of the Air Force in the Biden administration, said the other day that he thinks the Chinese military will say they're ready. We have to be ready for this. My view is we desperately want peace. The Chinese are going to look at us both in terms of our strength, but also in terms of our political commitments. And this is where I think President Trump has been exactly right, which is being willing to talk to President Xi Jinping, not insulting President Xi Jinping and President Putin and others unnecessarily, not supporting things like Taiwan independence, and at the same time being prepared to be strong. And this is where I think if we appoint or if people are put into positions of power who think that we can walk and chew gum and do everything and start wars in 3 different theaters at the same time, not only will that be bad like it was in the Iraq War, and it's often the same people, it will be far more catastrophic. Tucker, I don't think this is an exaggeration. I think we stand on the precipice of losing a major power war for the first time in our history. So people need to know what time it is, and that really requires focusing on China with the purpose of peace, like we did in the Cold War, which was to say, we're going to be strong. We're not going to go over the line like Eisenhower did in 1950. He's not going to go into Hungary. We're not going to go to Czechoslovakia in 1968. But don't come across our line because you see it's not going to succeed for you. So I think we really stand at a crossroads. And I think President Trump has a mandate for peace. So I just, as an American, whatever happens to me, I so hope that we don't end up with the same failed recipe of starting wars all over the place or getting enmeshed in conflicts when we can't afford to do so, and they're not in the interest of the American people.
From a non-expert position, which is my position, just as someone who's watching kind of, there does seem to be broad recognition that whatever our objectives in Ukraine were, we didn't achieve them and we can't. Zelensky immediately comes out upon Trump's election and says, actually, I'm for peace. That does maybe seem like it's winding down. Oh, who knows?
I hope. Yeah.
But the noises are consistent with winding down.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, the very people who are pushing that war all of a sudden like very excited about a war with Iran.
Yeah.
It's like they just seamlessly move. It's like, oh, Ukraine, whatever. Actually, the real problem is Iran, and telling us that Iran's trying to murder President Trump, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know what's true. I don't. But how would the United States, what would happen if we went to war with Iran?
Well, I mean, I think, look, Iran's a bad regime. We don't want to have a nuclear weapon. We don't want to support Israel. We don't want to be able to support groups attacking Israel, et cetera, et cetera. But haven't we learned the lesson over the last 25 years about the ill-advised nature of very significant conflicts in the Middle East that don't have clear goals and clear connection to American interests? Haven't we been didn't we run this experiment a couple times? And it's often the exact same people calling for war with Iran who were involved in the past. And it's shouldn't there be some degree of accountability? Moreover, it's like a bad idea in itself. I mean, I was criticized in The Bulwark by Eric Edelman, who was Dick Cheney's advisor and number 3 at the Pentagon under Bush. He said my ideas were iconoclastic. And I was like, thank you. I'm delighted that you think my ideas are iconoclastic.
But how could Eric Edelman be writing with any credibility at all on foreign policy questions after being intimately involved in the Iraq War and then never apologizing? I don't understand. There should be some international authority that requires contrition, like a moral UN where you don't get to say another word until you don ashes and sackcloth and apologize.
I mean, who among us isn't? I'm certainly not inerrant. I'm certainly not infallible. But at least show some. It's like Paul Gigot of the Wall Street Journal a year ago gave a speech to AEI, treated the Iraq War as like a mulligan. It's I think that's a big deal. And obviously, a lot of people got to had different views, et cetera. But it's kind of show the contrition, show the penance, show the learning. And so that I think is the other thing though, Tucker, is it's the same people who are calling for attacking Iran who are also calling for escalating the war in Ukraine, or even a no-fly zone, recognizing an independent Taiwan, or getting in a war with China, or attacking North Korea. It's if we do all those things, we know objectively as a fact that our military is not capable of fighting more than one major war at a time. So even if you did want to, getting in multiple fights with people at the same time is just foolhardy. And I mean, but the way I think about it is the Washington blob establishment can get us into wars and crises, but they can't fix the problem. So It's really important right now, and it seems to me that just listening to President Trump and his historic victory, the decisive mandate he got, his leadership, his mandate, his agenda for peace from a position of strength, use the military sparingly but have it be strong. It's really important not to get enmeshed all over the place and either bleed ourselves out or in a catastrophic multi-front loss.
We've told you before about Hallow. It is a great app that I am proud to say I use, my whole family uses. It's for daily prayer and Christian meditation, and it's transformative. So with everything happening in the world right now, it is essential to ground yourself. This is not some quack cure. This is the oldest and most reliable cure in history. It's prayer. Ground yourself in prayer and scripture every single day. That is a prerequisite for staying sane and healthy, and maybe for doing better eternally. So if you're busy on the road, headed to kids' sports, there is always time to pray and reflect alone or as a family, but it's hard to be organized about it. Building a foundation of prayer is going to be absolutely critical as we head into November, praying that God's will is done in this country and that peace and healing come to us here in the United States and around the world. Christianity obviously is under attack everywhere. That's not an accident. Why is Christianity, the most peaceful of all religions, under attack globally? Did you see the opening of the Paris Olympics? There's a reason, because the battle is not temporal. It's taking place in the unseen world. It's a spiritual battle, obviously. So try Hallow. Get 3 months completely free at Hallow. That's hallow.com/Tucker. If there's ever a time to get spiritually in tune and ground yourself in prayer, it's now. Hallow will help. Personally and strongly and totally sincerely recommended. Hallow.com/Tucker. I think that's the last thing Donald Trump wants.
Certainly seems that way.
Right. I mean, the arc of his life is so remarkable. The redemption that we just saw on Tuesday,
it's amazing, yeah.
Without precedent, really, in American history. And so, if you wanted to destroy his presidency, his second presidency, what's the one foolproof way to destroy it?
No president has ever lost a great power war. Donald Trump has run to his enormous historic credit. He has been shot. He has had lawfare conducted against him, and he has had the bravery and the vision and the persistence and the commitment at great personal physical cost, but also to his reputation, his family, et cetera, to stand up for these principles that the United States desperately needs, putting Americans' interests first, peace, prosperity, et cetera, reindustrialization. Now is the time to put that into practice, whoever it is. I can't stress how important that is. And if you're thinking about a historical legacy, Joe Biden's going to leave a legacy that's terrible. I mean, we're for all the things, you mentioned the war in Ukraine. 2.5 years in, Julian Barnes' New York Times just reported that the intelligence community is reporting that the Ukrainians are losing, that it's not a stalemate. So after all that, after all the preaching, after all the moralism, the Ukrainians are losing the war and the Russians are making enormous progress. And we're unprepared. We're unprepared for a war with China. The Middle East is in the worst situation in years. We can't even stop the Houthis, like a third or fourth rate power. And we're not prepared. So they've left us on the precipice. They've put us on the Titanic is directing towards the iceberg. It's going to take a sharp turn. And the way I think about this, and when I had the honor to work for President Trump in his first term, when we worked on the defense strategy to try to get us to prioritize, again, in my view, with the same logic, very consistent with what President Trump, I think, was trying to lay out. That was we were a couple miles from the iceberg back then. Now we're right up, we're a few thousand yards. And it's not easy to turn the Titanic. And if you turn the Titanic 90 degrees, people are going to fall out of their bunks. chandeliers and beautiful, plates are going to get broken. But that's where we are. But that is the fault of what I call the liberal primacist alliance. That is the fault of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the primacist, sort of old school Republicans who, if they pursued that policy further, would lead us to catastrophe.
Then how is it that, from what I can tell, pretty much every person in the running for the big national security jobs other than you is part of that alliance? And I know them all, and I like some of them. Yeah. A couple sitting U.S. senators who I think are really nice guys, but they're tools of the people you describe, like completely. There's kind of no doubt about it. How is it that there are so few people on the Republican side in national security with experience who agree with the president-elect who leads the party?
So I've thought a lot about this because I've been fighting, as you kindly gesture, in a sort of lonely battle within the sort of blob to put us on, like, to me, what is common sense.
Exactly. Like, right? That's right.
And yet so few people do it. And why is that? It's so weird. And honestly, so much of your insight and some commentaries, both on this show and your other podcast interviews and your shows, et cetera, because I think there's a human sociological element. I mean, and one of the things that's kind of bizarre is that I think, like, today, people like us, we can learn a lot from the new left of the 60s and 70s. Like,
100%.
There's something wrong with the establishment and the way the establishment. Now, I believe there's always an establishment. There's an establishment in Mao's China, but we need a better establishment.
Well, that's it.
You're a fan of Teddy Roosevelt too. Like, the idea that, like, the establishment just does what it used to do is, like, no, the point is the establishment is supposed to serve the people, right?
Of course.
But I think there's an element, and I try to give credit because, like, yeah, there's money and stuff, but there's other ways of making money. I think it's this psychic kind of, like, network benefit of being part of, like, essentially functionally an imperial capital.
Yes.
And everybody comes to, you know this, right? They come to the capital and say, you're so wise. We need your leadership. You're so moral in your vision. And it happens in Congress where people come, they've probably not thought about foreign policy that much. There are all these structures set up to kind of acculturate them. And again, like, I don't want to sound too new left, but, like, this is kind of what happens. And so you need, I think, a clear-eyed view of how to change, and frankly, a willingness to buck the system. And this, to me, is like, and I'm certainly far from the only person to make this point, and I think you have as well, is like, President Trump ran against the system. And that is so important because it's the system, the liberal primacist alliance, in other things like trade and economics, et cetera, that need to be a fundamental change. And already he's paid the price, literally, and shown the bravery and commitment to go through that. And so now it's about, like, capitalizing. And frankly, my hope is if that happened, a lot of these people, especially in the younger generations, would follow. And forgive me for a little bit of patting myself on the back, but I think it's an apropos comment. I was out at a thing a few months ago, and this young guy came up, strong guy, whatever. And he said, "Hey, Mr. Colby, I'm going into the Marines, and I just want to say all the young Republicans love what you're saying." And I said to him, I was like, well, that's good because all the old Republicans hate it. And he's like, yeah, that's the point.
Boy, do they. Boy, right? Do they.
They do. And that's, like, to me, I think of myself, I'm like the first line, not to, this is, although, there are people out there you wonder about, but, like, this is not, like, actually getting shot. But it's like, I'm trying to think about how do we protect Americans from not getting shot?
Of course.
Right? And so I think the young people can see it. The young people who are, like, who are not bought in to, who have not been kind of acculturated, worked for X senator on this committee for 10 years and then went to that think tank and blah, blah, blah. I think they if you build it, they will come. But it's like the first echelon. we take a lot of metaphorical flack, hopefully metaphorical.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.